What is up, YouTube fam? Robbie C here. Welcome back to another Lorcana deck tech video. Today we're talking about a wonderful deck called Damage in Wonderland. This deck revolves entirely around one singular card that when I saw it released in set 7, I thought, and maybe we can make something competitive, but at worst, we're going to make something for our competitive theme deck pod for multiplayer decks that we use to introduce new players to. And I'll go ahead and spoil the chart a little bit. Not only is this deck super fun to play, but it falls so easily into the budget category that I actually can't eat at Chipotle for the cost that it would take me to buy this entire deck. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the identity or the heart of the deck, because it revolves entirely around one singular card, and that is the Queen of Hearts, Unpredictable Bully. Her ability, if I lose my temper, whenever another character is played, put a damage counter on them. This is so impactful for a multitude of reasons, because this singular ability moves around two of the hardest abilities to target or get around for straight damage in the game, and those are Resist and Ward. If a character has Ward, that means that you cannot target them, but when abilities affect the entire board or the opposing player has to choose that character, it moves around Ward. Often, warded characters are going to have a little bit lower willpower or health because it can be more difficult to remove them and get them off the board. Queen of Hearts doesn't care because she just puts a damage counter on any character being played. It is important to note that this does have a drawback because it also affects your characters coming into play, so we'll talk about a little bit of the strategy in that as we walk through the deck tech itself. But another thing about this is that it puts a damage counter on the character. It does not deal 1 damage to them. If a character has Resist, that means that anytime you do 1 singular damage, it does nothing because they have Resist, so they just ignore that. We're not doing 1 damage, we're putting a damage counter on them, which is pivotal for the success and the removal that we have coming later on in the deck. So let's talk about the curve real fast. The curve of this deck, we have 8 1-drops that are in the deck, but realistically we only have 1 actual 1-drop, and that's going to be our card soldiers, the royal troops. While a damage character is in play, this character gets +2 strength, and that means that it's a damage character on your side or their side of the board. So quite often the card soldiers is really going to be functioning as a 3/2, which is really, really strong. Our other 4 1-drops we have are Mosquito Bite. We'll talk about that later, but it's pretty much never a great option on turn 1 to be playing Mosquito Bite. Obviously, there are exceptions. Looking at you, Curse Merfolk. Now, where the deck really leans in and the most represented number across the board is our 2-drops, and we have 16 2-drops in there, and then it balances out with 8 at 3 and 4, and then at 5, we jump all the way up to 13, which can seem like a really high number, but our 2 Shift Queen of Hearts options are both 5 costs, and most often we're hoping to really play them as a 3-drop. So the curve does round out pretty nicely, but then we can pivot based on how turn 3 went on how we want to attack the rest of the game. Now, inkables versus uninkables, we do have 12 uninkables in the deck, so we're erring on the higher side for standard. One of these uninkable options is certainly a tech option that if this makes you uncomfortable, you can swap out, and I'll tell you exact cards you can swap out later, but I'm actually liking the iteration of pushing from 12 instead of the 8 uninkables I had before, just because of the card that it allows me to add. Now let's go ahead and look at some of the tech options, because you can see here I have most of the deck laid out in terms of the cards represented, and everything revolves around the queens. So we'll go ahead and start by talking about them. In the 2-drop slot, we have 2 different Queen of Hearts. The first Queen of Hearts is the Queen of Hearts Impulsive Ruler. This is a 2-cost inkable 2/2 that has Rush, which means that often people are not ready for Rush, so you can end up slamming into your target the turn that you play this character. Like I said, we want to treat our Shift Queens as our turn 3 option quite often, so you aren't always necessarily using her Rush ability, but it certainly will come into play. The second 2-drop we have is the Queen of Hearts Losing Her Temper. This is a new Queen of Hearts that showed up in set 7, and while this character has damage, she gets +3 strength, which is super cool. When we bring out our main queen, she's going to enter the board with damage anyways, so she's realistically coming in as a 4/3 at the 2-drop slot, which is so insanely massive. The stars of the show, though, are going to be our 2 Queen of Hearts. One we've already talked about in the Unpredictable Bully. She's the queen. She is the head honcho of the entire deck. On games where we're able to get the Queen of Hearts Unpredictable Bully down on the board on turn 3, other options we have available, it becomes very, very difficult for our opponent to win, and the deck really does seem to pop off from that point. But you've heard us mention before, every good deck should have draw engines, and one of the draw engines we have is actually our other shift Queen of Hearts, and that is the Queen of Hearts Sensing Weakness. What's really great about her is that she is a shift 2. I always, even as I'm mentioning this, I forget that even she is a shift 2, which is super cheap. And whenever one of your characters challenges another character, you may draw a card. We're going to have several opportunities to challenge as we play this card. And so because of that, she ends up creating a great draw engine for us. And really, all 3 of our draw engines all revolve around challenging, because that's one of the biggest ways that we are going to be able clear their board while pushing what we're trying to do. So while we're here, we'll go ahead and talk about the other 2 draw engines that exist. The first is going to be the Mad Hatter Unruly Eccentric. Whenever a damaged character challenges another character, you may draw a card. Because most of our characters are going to be coming in after the Queen of Hearts Unpredictable Bully has hit the board, these later characters are going to have damage. When they're challenging other characters, we're going to be able to draw, and this does compound. So if the Queen of Hearts Sensing Weakness is on the board, as well as the Mad Hatter Unruly Eccentric, and one of our damaged characters ends up challenging, we actually draw 2 cards because it fits both conditions. A character is challenged and that character was damaged. Now, our third engine is one of my top 2 favorite villains of all time, and that is Scar, the Vengeful Lion. This is a card that I really wanted to have a little more impact, and one of the best parts about him is that he is a draw engine that we don't really need to ever turn sideways. And he has Ward. We talked about Ward earlier on, so it's going to be very difficult for our opponent to remove this character because he still does his effect even while he's standing upright, and that is whenever one of your characters challenges a damaged character, you may draw a card. If the Mad Hatter is able to draw us cards based off of the fact that Queen of Hearts is pinging our characters, not only is it pinging our characters, but it's also pinging their characters when they enter the board. And so because of this, if you just kind of do the math, if a damaged character of ours challenges a damaged character of theirs while we have all 3 of our draw engines on the board, we're going to draw 3 cards per challenge as that occurs. So we're going to be able to see a lot of options, which is phenomenal. Now, I know what you're thinking. You may be saying, Robbie, that seems like a very, very niche circumstance. And I wish I could say it was. But as I went through testing this, it felt like we always saw at least one of our draw engines. And once one draw engine started cooking for a little bit, the other one started to appear super fast. So we ended up cycling through the deck quite often. I was shocked at how good the draw was inside this deck. There's 3 more things I want to talk about inside this deck: the locks, the removal, and the flex spots, or what I like to call the designated hitters. When I say lock, what I mean is opportunities where you seem to have such control of the board that it seems like the game is sort of over before it's actually over, because you can just sort of walk it out from there. Now, one of our main locks comes from the King of Hearts Picky Ruler. Remember, whenever we put the Queen of Hearts Unpredictable Bully out on the board, every time a character is played, it's going to take a damage counter. Damaged characters cannot challenge our characters, which means that unless they have hard removal via actions or board wipes or things like that, as they're playing characters, they're going to have to be playing Amber or something like that in order to heal their characters, because if not, then when we turn our characters sideways and start questing out, the King of Hearts Picky Ruler keeps them from challenging into our characters. So even if our characters are weak or damaged, we get to choose when the fighting occurs because we're, Picky Ruler. But that's not even my favorite side of the deck. The best lock that feels like we hit the board is when we have the Queen of Hearts and we also have Cheshire Cat from the Shadows on the board. Now, Cheshire Cat from the Shadows is an 8 cost, so that hurts. That's a very expensive card to be able to be played. It quests for 2, so that's going to help push our agenda quite further. It has a 6 willpower, so when it comes into the board, even taking a damage, it's still going to have 5 willpower. Currently, there are only a few removal spells that exist in the entire game that are able to deal with a 5 willpower character. Next, it's evasive, so even when it's turned sideways, it's on a plane that is so tough tough to deal with. For our Magic the Gathering players, people can often forget about the sort of flying board where you have to be ready to deal with flying characters. The same thing happens in Lorcana with evasive characters because only evasive characters can challenge other evasive characters. So when you sneak in an evasive character or two, they're going to have to use strong removal in order to get rid of it. And if they're using our strong removal on Cheshire Cat, well, that's great because that means that our queen is living longer, and then that creates more opportunity for the King of Hearts Picky Ruler to create another lock on the side of it, because the Wicked Smile is the best feature of the Cheshire Cat from the shadows. By simply exerting and turning this character sideways, we can banish chosen damaged character. I had a game while testing this. I had 2 Queen of Hearts Unpredictable Bullies on the board, which means that every character that entered the board had 2 damage counters placed on them right off the bat. So already several characters are just going to straight up be eliminated before they even hit the board. If they happen to survive, the Cheshire Cat from the shadows could just, on my turn, simply turn sideways and banish that character before it got to really do anything else. This is such a powerful combo, and even in tweaking the numbers, I could see a world that we sort of up this count, because when this lock hits the board, it is so insanely tough to deal with. You'll notice that we actually have 6 other Cheshire Cats inside of the deck, but because our big Cheshire Cat from the shadows has a Shift 5 ability, we can pay 3 less, which means we get Cheshire Cat to the board a lot more often when we're able to shift that character rather than having to move an ink all the way up to 8. Now let's talk removal, because removal is all about the damage once again. Our common removal, if you're playing Ruby, you have to include Brawl, but the other 2 are cards that are not quite often played, and they fit so perfectly inside of the shell. The first is going to be Mosquito Bite, inkable action that puts 1 damage counter on chosen character. Very similar to the Unpredictable Bullies ability, this is placing a damage counter. So it doesn't care about resist. It just puts a damage counter on them, which enables Cheshire Cat to be able to remove them, but it also allows us to ring the bell. Banish chosen damage character. This is just a 3-cost action that just straight up banishes a damage character. So it's what the Cheshire Cat is going to do, but it's on an action. It's just insane how much removal we have as well. With that being said, let's talk about the shifting options and our sort of tech options that you can remove based on who you're playing against, what your local meta looks like. Coming into the 2-drop, and this is the one that I mentioned, this shifts our uninkables from 8 to 12, and that is Bonsai Gluttonous Predator. This is a 2-cost uninkable 3/2 that quests for 2. One of the reasons I really like this card is because it allows us to put some lore pressure on the board. When we start pressuring lore and moving up quickly, it does cause our opponents to sweat a little bit and have to make and take some bad trades, and bad trades are certainly going to be happening. Because of the fact that he has 3 strength, we're just trying to turn him sideways as often as we possibly can, because even if he enters the board taking 1 damage from our own Queen of Hearts Unpredictable Bully, when they go to trade in, they've also taken a damage from the Queen of Hearts. And so rarely are you going to find something trying to trade into this that has more than 4 willpower. Bonsai does huge work, and he's just questing his life away the entire time. Next is Fidget, the Sneaky Bat. This is an evasive character. We talked about the evasive side with Cheshire Cat that can be really hard to ignore. Not only does Fidget quest for 2, but he also gives evasive to another character. So not only are we having to worry about this like sneaky evasive plane already, but we're bringing another character into that evasive plane. So you can move your Queen of Hearts Unpredictable Bully into there. You can move one of your draw engines into there. There's just so many options of things you can move in that even if you don't have the lock laid down of the King of Hearts Picky Ruler, you can still protect some of your bigger hitters and allow them to keep doing their thing. Have these 2 lore questers be safe because they're on the evasive plane. Now the biggest heavy hitter is coming in as Gaston, the Pure Paragon. This is a 9-cost uninkable card, and I know some of you are seeing like, bro, Robbie, we're never gonna get to 9, like we're never getting there. But the best part is that Gaston costs 2 less ink for every single damage character you have in play. And you're starting to see where this hits. There are so few things that survive a 10 damage swing, and Gaston really does. On the games where you get Gaston, you almost feel invincible, even if you don't have the King of Hearts on your side of the board to protect your characters. You're just daring people. Hey, go ahead. swing it in trade, because Gaston is just going to purely punch you right off the board. And then last but not least, our big heavy hitter on the questing side is Robin Hood Sneaky Sleuth. Robin Hood is a 5-cost inkable who is going to get us 1 extra lore when he quests per damaged character on your opponent's side of the board. Means if they decide to go wide and we're just in this questing battle of going back and forth, if you're able to get Robin Hood down on the board, he demands an immediate answer. And in one of my games where I was testing, they used all of their characters to trade into mine, which left them with just an army of damaged characters on the other side. And what did I do? I played Robin Hood, Sneaky Sleuth, and he quested for 5 on the next turn, which allowed me to close the game out super fast. So when I say tech options, if you find that the uninkable thing becomes too difficult for you, I would always look at, instead of Bonsai Gluttonous Predator, there's a 2-drop Robin Hood that when you play him, if their opponent has damaged characters in play, you gain 1 lore. You could simply slot them out, and it's another 2-drop option, so it fills the same slot, and it's inkable. Plus, it allows your 5-drop Robin Hood, who has a Shift 3 ability, to also come in at a different cost. So let's talk mulligans and some ideal opening lines that you're going to want to be looking for inside of this deck. We have to remember that we only have 1 actual 1-drop. So when we open up and we see that we have mosquito bites in hand, we're not going to plan on keeping mosquito bites pretty much ever. The dream opening is we're looking for a 2-drop Queen of Hearts, and we're looking for 1 of our Shift Queens. If we can find the unpredictable bully, that's going to be a keep every single time. Now here, depending on what I wanted to do, I could keep Ring the Bell if I really wanted to make sure that I had on the turn after, on turn 4, once the Queen of Hearts has pinged something, I'm going to be able to remove it immediately. That's a safe option. So here, I would probably toss the 2 mosquito bites, the fidget, and a brawl in hopes that I can come across and find our 1-drop card soldiers. So we're able to do this. This is about as dream an opening hand as we could find, because we have both of our Shift Queens available and we have 2 of the 2-drops in order to look at. So if this is our ideal opening hand, let's see how we would play this out. If we were going first, we would probably start off by inking Ring the Bell and playing the card soldiers, because it is our 1-drop. If we don't have the card soldiers, most often we're just going to pass on turn 1. We come up with another Ring the Bell. I don't love the idea of having to ink a second Ring the Bell, but I'm fine with that just because I love my other cards so much. And we do have 2 uninkables here. So we'd ink Ring the Bell, and we're probably going to play the 2/2 Queen of Hearts. The reason we're going to save this one is because she only has 2 willpower. So if I want to shift this Queen of Hearts unpredictable bully on the next turn, I want to make sure that I'm shifting and allowing characters with more health or willpower to be able to survive here. We'd probably go ahead and quest card soldiers for 1 here, and we would want to leave this upright even if they had something that we could easily trade into, because the shift is so important. On the next turn, we end up with 1 of our scars. While this is a draw engine, we're going to go ahead and ink Scar, because we have a second draw engine in hand in our other Queen of Hearts. We're going to shift the Queen of Hearts unpredictable bully. You could decide that the better option here would be to shift the Queen of Hearts sensing weakness, because she has less willpower, but we know that on turn 4 we're probably going to be playing the King of Hearts Picky Ruler to begin with. Draw, we end up with Brawl. Now here we have some options, because we know that we're going to want to play King of Hearts. So we take a look at the board, we'd adjust, and I think the ink options here are going to be either the 2-drop Queen of Hearts or the Brawl. If I know that I'm going to want some board presence or some challenge later, then I would ink this. But if I think that, depending on the matchups, I could save this, so we'll go ahead and just say that we ink this 2-drop Queen of Hearts, because we know we can see more of her later on. We'd go ahead and play King of Hearts here. He would go ahead and take 1 damage because he enters the board while Queen of Hearts is out here. And we just continue walking along the line. On turn 5, we end up here with another situation where we have a Queen of Hearts, a Brawl, and a 3rd Queen of Hearts, our draw engine. So we're actually going to ink this Queen of Hearts, because of the other Queen of Hearts, her rush ability doesn't really come into play, because she's only going to have 1 willpower left because of the other one. We'll end up playing this Queen of Hearts, and of course, she will also take 1 damage as she enters the board, but now we have a draw engine online. So our card soldiers are now a 3/2 because we have damaged characters. So they would likely want to challenge into something, and because of that, I draw a card based on Queen of Hearts. Let's look at another mulligan situation and see what we come up with. Now, we have the card soldiers in hand, and we have our Queen of Hearts, and we have Cheshire Cat. So these are 3 cards that we're certainly going to keep. I would say priority order is going to be one of your 2-drop queens as well, followed up by either of our 5-drop queens. But then right after that is going to be the Cheshire Cats, because if we can get Cheshire Cats out there, that is huge for us. We end up with 2 brawls, a mosquito bite, and a Robin Hood. Robin Hood's going to be great later on in the game, but not ideal considering we don't have the Queen of Hearts that's going to be pinging for damage. So we'd go ahead and send all 4 of those back, end up with 4 new cards, and see what we can do from there. We know that we have our 2-drop Bonsai, and we have the 2-drop queens, but we don't have the shifting ability of them. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and send one of our queens to the Inkwell, because we don't have the guaranteed game plan of getting the queens out. While it's nice that we can rely on it, we may need the brawl to remove a threat that appears, like a Daisy Duck or things like that, and we'll go ahead and put card soldiers out on the board. We draw on our next turn, and we end up with a mosquito bite. That's an easy one to go ahead and ink because we don't even have the removal options necessarily just yet. From here, I would be looking at what does the board state look like. I still don't have another queen to shift on, so me playing the queen here is hoping that I'm going to end up with a queen on the top of the deck. That would be the gamble play if I wanted to exert my ink to spin the queen and do that. The safer play most likely is to exert the 2 ink to play Bonsai to start generating some lore pressure that they're going to have to trade in and deal with him. Now, this is where we see if the gamble paid off. Now see, it does backfire because if we would have played the queen, we can shift this queen on. It's just something that you don't know. You kind of have to feel out based on the board that they have, the board that we have. What can you do? But the best part here, ladies and gentlemen, is that because we drew into this now, we actually have a multitude of options that end up being really great. So we'll go ahead and ink the brawl, and we'll actually spend 2 to go ahead and play this Queen of Hearts so that we have the shift option available. We would then keep questing Bonsai out most likely and walk our way down. Here's where we get some choices to make because we have both queens available. We have draw that we know we can move into. So we'd have to look at the board state and see, do we feel like we're in control right now, or do we feel like we need some more options in front of us? If we feel like we need more options, we're going to go ahead and shift into the queen. Just because she is the powerhouse of the deck doesn't mean that she's the right choice every single time. I honestly would probably shift into her because we have a Cheshire Cat in hand. So likely what I would end up doing here is if one of these cards is hopefully still alive, we'll say that they traded into the Bonsai and got rid of the Bonsai. So we went to the discard over here. We want to make sure that we can draw often, right? So what I would do is I would probably shift into this queen and then have the card soldiers challenge something on their side of the board. Because it's challenging and this Queen of Hearts is here, I end up drawing. Thankfully, I draw into an inkable, so I would ink that Queen of Hearts and end up playing the Cheshire Cat. This is big because now my draw engine's online and I'm looking for my second Cheshire Cat, which is going to be phenomenal for me. On the next turn I draw, I end up with a Robin Hood, but I'm at 5 ink now. So I don't have to shift anything anymore. So I can just simply ink the Robin Hood, play the Queen of Hearts. If I challenge into something, if my card soldiers have lived, I would get to draw, but if not. And so from here, I'm just continuing to look through my deck, trying to find the Cheshire Cat, the big Cheshire Cat. This is one of those things that I know I could up the count if I want this consistently, and if I did, I might look at lowering my Robin Hood package. It's just something that you can mess around with the numbers to see which lines you end up leaning on most often. So it's time, let's head to the chart and let's see what the evaluation looks like for Damage in Wonderland. In terms of budget, this is an extremely budget-friendly option. At the time of recording this, the deck comes in at $13.67 if I were to buy all the cards, which means that I could eat Chipotle. It would cost me more to eat there. than it would to buy this entire deck. So it is extremely budget friendly and super fun to play. I love this. Now, in terms of tribal, the tribal aspect of this was tricky for me to evaluate because lots of the cards fall into the Wonderland theme. We have the Cheshire Cats, we have the Queen of Hearts, we have the Card Soldiers. Then when we get to the actions, none of the actions seem to fit into the theme. And then we have the Scar and the Bonsai sneaking in there as well as Gaston. 27-ish of the cards end up not falling into our theme, so I'm certainly going to put it in the clicks because most of the ones that don't fall into the Wonderland theme, such as Scar and Bonsai, do fall into their own piece together. So that's where I can see the clicks really hitting. In terms of competitive, this one's super fascinating because when I ran it against the other decks and I'm operating them inside of the living room, it's very competitive, and I feel like it goes toe-to-toe even amongst the pod of decks that we've made. When the Cheshire Cat lock is out there, it is very tough for any standard living room deck to be winning, especially because we do have the draw engines going. In terms of AI, it wasn't even close. One game, the opponent got to 15, but I saw the cards that I had in my hand, but I just knew, like, I just have to stabilize eventually, and you could see the stabilization coming. So it felt really good there. Playing against other people, I've tested it on Fight Club, and in Fight Club, it actually does pretty well as well. So I think I'm personally going to slot this in at the set champs level. I think that this deck is sneaky to play against, and you're going to get some surprise wins off because people just don't necessarily have an answer. And because you can sort of overload with threats, they have to use their removal wisely. And when you start playing on the evasive plane, start getting some card draw going, I don't know that it wins as set champs, but I think with the right pilot and the right focus of this, I think you certainly could have a competitive option, which I think is really, really fun, especially for how cheap this deck comes in. And then where would I put this in terms of the fun, gimmick, all of that? I do think that this falls into the gimmick category just because I think that while it is very consistent and you're going to hit those things fairly often, especially if you mulligan correctly, you're going to be seeing these things happen over and over again. I think that where it starts to win consistently feels gimmicky. If we get all of the right cards landing, you'll hear people talk about, well, if this card hits and this card hits and this card hits, then I automatically win and you're living in magical Christmas land. Well, the colors are red and green. That's where we're at anyways. So I think that, yeah, it does land pretty well inside the gimmick category. I think Old Trusty, it's just knocking on the door of Old Trusty to find that reliability, hitting it over and over again. And it is very, very fun. I like how it goes, but I think that I'm having the most fun when I'm playing this deck when I have the Queen of Hearts Unpredictable Bully on the board, as well as one of the two locks between the King of Hearts and Cheshire Cat. Just because of that, there's a lot of combo pieces that have to fall in place, which is going to put it in that gimmick category for me. So let me know what you think. Let me know how you feel about this deck list and things that I can include in future deck list guides to help you with it. Are you heading to Wonderland soon? Are you falling down the rabbit hole to see what's going to happen here? If you were to make upgrades to the deck, what would you choose? So thank you so much for watching. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day and you can make fantastic for someone else too. But for now, we are going to leave you with the questing.